The war had been raging across the stars for decades, but no one expected the desolate plains of Borealis Prime to become such a brutal battleground. Once lush and covered in sapphire-colored flora, the planet was now a smoldering wasteland of craters, collapsed structures, and drifting smoke. The air was acrid with the scent of plasma burns, and the skies, once host to migratory crystal-winged avians, now swirled with ash. Corporal Nathan Reed, a mid-level infantryman of the United Terran Armed Forces, was deployed on a routine reconnaissance patrol. The area had been declared secured following the withdrawal of Xeran forces, the reptilian, avian-like alien species that had been humanity's bitter enemy for years. But Red knew better than to trust reports filed too quickly. Sometimes, the battlefield held survivors. Or worse, traps. Armed and alert, Reed moved through the cracked terrain with care. His suit's heads-up display flickered with intermittent signals from the wreckage around him. Dead power cells. Scrambled distress beacons, lifeless. Until he heard something that didn't fit. A cough, raspy and faint. He froze. Not a machine. Not wind. A voice. Crouching low, he followed the sound until it led him to a shallow crater filled with twisted metal, the remnants of a Xeran transport shuttle. It had clearly crash-landed, and the impact had destroyed much of its fuselage. There were no active weapon systems, no enemy forces nearby. Just broken glass, scorched plating, and scattered pieces of armor. Then he saw her. Half buried under the wreckage, she lay motionless. Her body was bruised, scales scorched in several places. One wing was mangled beneath a collapsed support beam. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Reed stared for a long moment, weapon half raised, heart pounding. She was a Xerana, sworn enemy of humanity. Trained soldiers were told to never assist, never trust, but she wasn't attacking. She wasn't even conscious. She was dying. And something in Reed snapped out in that moment. He stopped seeing her as Xeran. She was just a person, broken, bleeding, left behind. He tossed his rifle over his shoulder and sprang into action. Peace. By peace, he pried away the metal debris crushing her chest. Her body convulsed slightly from the pressure relief. He worked quickly, ignoring the pain of heat-scorched metal on his gloves. Dust swirled in the air, making it hard to breathe. But he didn't stop. She coughed again, barely able to lift her head. Their eyes met for the briefest second, her golden, slitted pupils wide with pain and disbelief. She whispered something in her native tongue too weak to be understood, but the tone was clear. Confusion and fear. He whispered back softly, "You're gonna be all right." Once she was freed, he wrapped her in a thermal blanket from his medkit and hoisted her onto his back. She was light, too light. Malnourished, likely injured internally. He activated the silent beacon on his comms and began the hike back to the field medical station. As he moved through the silent battlefield with a half-conscious alien on his back, Reed felt the weight of what he was doing. Saving the enemy something his squadmates would never understand. Something command might punish him for, but to him, it wasn't a choice. It was who he was. Reed had joined the military to protect life, not just follow orders. He remembered his father's words before he left for deployment. The measure of a soldier isn't how well he fights, it's what he refuses to become. And he refused to become someone who turned away from suffering. By the time he returned to the outskirts of the medical zone, dawn was breaking over Borealis Prime's charred horizon. He carried her like a wounded comrade, her head lolling weakly against his shoulder. A few stunned soldiers stared as he approached the tents. One corporal frowned. "What the hell is that?" Reed's jaw clenched. "She's alive. That's all you need to know." No one argued further. Not yet. As medics gathered reluctantly around the alien girl, Reed finally allowed himself to sit, sweat dripping from his brow. He watched as they checked her vitals, patched her wounds, and argued quietly over what to do. He didn't care. He had done the right thing. Corporal Nathan Reed had returned to base with a decision that set him apart from every other soldier around him. He hadn't just rescued a wounded enemy, he had demanded she be treated. In doing so, he challenged the core of the conflict. The dehumanization, or rather, the -person-ization- of the enemy species. The alien girl he had rescued was now lying in a makeshift isolation tent on the edge of the medical bay. Her body remained motionless most of the time, wrapped in thermal sheets, her reptilian skin blistered and scales discolored from plasma burns. The name she had given barely intelligible through her broken Terran was Thalza. Nathan stayed close, well beyond what regulations permitted. Officially, he had completed his recon mission and should have been rotated out to another post. But instead, he began volunteering for menial tasks in the triage zone just to remain near her tent. He knew that some medics, either out of disgust or indifference, weren't giving her the care she needed, so he took it upon himself. He changed her 4-bag when it ran low, adjusted her breathing support, slipped her protein supplements even when the official ration list didn't include her name. To some, she was just a lizard, a beast. But to Nathan, she was a life. There were whispers spreading across the base. Soldiers talked behind his back. One of them even said, "Reed's gone soft. Bet he thinks that thing's gonna fall in love with him." Others were more dangerous mutters about how bringing her back was a violation of wartime codes. Nathan didn't care. He'd taken an oath to protect, to serve, to uphold Terran values, not to mindlessly hate, and certainly not to abandon the helpless, no matter what species they were. Meanwhile, Thalza slowly regained strength. Her wing, though splinted and immobilized, was healing. Her breathing stabilized. The burns had begun to scar a sign of survival. Occasionally, she would open her eyes and stare at Nathan when he entered, as if studying something she couldn't fully grasp. She spoke more now haltingly, clumsily in a patchwork of her native Xeron and rudimentary Terran, and slowly Nathan pieced together her story. Thalza had been a communications officer, not even frontline military. When her shuttle was hit, she had radioed for help. The response from her commander had been chillingly short. "You are compromised. Die with dignity." Her own people had deemed her not worth saving. When Nathan heard that, he sat quietly beside her cot for a long while, fists clenched. The war had made monsters on both sides, but to abandon one of their own just because she was injured? That was a cruelty he couldn't stomach. One day, as he passed her a canteen of purified water, she took it with trembling claws and murmured, "Why?" He blinked. "Why what? Why save Thalza?" she asked, her accent rough but clear. "Enough," he shrugged. "You were dying. Humans don't walk away from that." She looked at him long and hard, her golden eyes shimmering. There was something behind them, confusion, maybe even shame. Thalza replied quietly, "Xerans do." That stunned Nathan into silence. For all her alien physiology, all the differences in culture, technology, and speech, here was someone grappling with the fact that everything she believed about her people and about his was being upended. They weren't just soldier and survivor anymore. They were people. Two individuals in a sea of war and chaos, sharing a space carved out of stubborn decency. That night, Nathan stood outside her tent, watching the perimeter patrols move like shadows against the rising moons. He thought about the things he had seen, the burned villages, the terrified civilians, the endless orders to march forward, never look back. And now, in his mind, all those memories stood in contrast to the simple fact that he had saved someone. Even when everyone told him not to, He wasn't trying to make peace between species or change the war. He just couldn't turn his back. That was the line he had drawn. The line between being a soldier and becoming a monster. And now, without saying it, he had made a silent promise to Thalza. As word of the alien girl's survival spread through the Terran outpost, so too did suspicion and resentment. Soldiers, engineers, and even low-ranking officers began whispering about Corporal Nathan Reed, the man who had not only rescued Ziran but defended her presence in the human medical bay. Officially, no one had yet moved to challenge his decision. The higher-ups hadn't issued any formal reprimands. But unofficially, Nathan could feel the tide turning. Sideways glances in the mess hall, conversations that stopped the moment he entered, jokes about pet reptiles and enemy brides, floated through the camp like toxic smoke. None of it stopped him. Inside the farthest tent of the triage zone, Thalza was slowly returning to life. Her healing was remarkable, accelerated by Terran medicines and a resilience that surprised even the medics. Her wing was still partially immobilized, but her burns had begun to scar over in pale silver ridges. She could now sit upright and speak in fragmented, functional Terran. Nathan was with her every day. He wasn't just feeding her and checking her vitals anymore. He was teaching her how to pronounce human words, explaining slang, answering questions she didn't dare ask anyone else. One night, after a particularly long shift on perimeter watch, he found her staring at her reflection. In a sheet of polished metal, "I don't understand," she said quietly, claws tracing one of her burn scars. "Why would your kind risk their lives for this?" Nathan knelt beside her. "Because we don't judge worth by how pretty someone looks, or even by what species they are. You're the only one here who believes that," she said. Didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right. The next day, things escalated. A young private fresh from the academy and full of ideology marched into the medical tent with a look of disgust. He shoved past two nurses and pointed directly at Thalza. "What is that still doing here?" he barked. "She's the enemy. We lost 5 good men on the southern ridge because of her kind." Nathan, who had just returned from the Cums shack, didn't even hesitate. He stepped between the soldier and Thalza, hands at his sides but jaw clenched. "You want to yell at someone? Yell at me," the private sneered. "You're defending the enemy? I'm defending a person." Things nearly turned violent. The medics had to intervene. The commanding officer later pulled Nathan aside and told him to stand down, to let the matter go. But Reed couldn't. He'd made a choice the moment he dragged Thalza from the wreckage. He wouldn't abandon her now. After the incident, her tent was moved to a quieter corner of the base. Officially, it was for security reasons. Unofficially, it was to make her easier to ignore. Yet something changed after that confrontation. Thalza began speaking more confidently. She asked more about Earth, about human families, about emotions. She recounted moments from her childhood on the Ziran homeworld, how she had once wanted to be a bioengineer, not a soldier. How the war had forced her into a role she never chose. And one night, after another long session practicing human phrases, she looked at Nathan and said, "You risked your life. Not just for me, but against your own kind." He didn't respond. He just gave her a tired smile. Thalza leaned forward, her voice soft. "Your strength isn't in your weapons. It's here." She tapped her claw lightly against his chest. Over his heart. It was the first time she had touched him. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was trust. Later that week, she stood on her own for the first time. Still shaky, still wrapped in thermal fabric and medical gauze, but standing. Nathan helped her take her first few steps, and when a passing soldier saw them and muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable," Thalza didn't flinch. She just whispered, "Let them talk." In A camp filled with suspicion and fear, an unspoken bond had formed. She wasn't the enemy anymore. The relative calm that had settled over the outpost after Thalza's recovery didn't last. Rumors continued to grow, and soon they reached the ears of someone with real power. One morning, Nathan returned from a resupply shift to find his commanding officer waiting for him outside the triage tent, flanked by 2 military intelligence agents. "You've made a mess of things, Corporal," the officer said, tight-lipped. They didn't need to say more. The cold efficiency in their tone made it clear. Thalza was now a problem. The orders weren't written, but they were absolute. Thalza, as a non-registered enemy combatant, was to be relocated to a secure intelligence facility. Nathan had heard of these places, prisons in all but name, where even friendly aliens vanished into metal cells and were never seen again. He saw the medics packing up her cot, saw her wing rebandaged with sharp, impersonal hands. She didn't resist, but the trust in her eyes faltered when she met his. She didn't need translation to know what was happening, and Nathan couldn't let it stand. That night, while the outpost powered down and shifts rotated through tired routine, he put his plan into motion. He borrowed a skimmer transport from the hangar, a light, fast recon vehicle equipped with short-range stealth plating. Then he slipped into Thalza's tent under the cover of darkness. She looked at him with quiet resolve. "They're moving me." "I know," he replied, pulling the 4 from her arm. "But not to where they think." For a brief second, she hesitated. "You'll be branded a traitor." "Then I guess I'm yours now," he said with a grin. "Let's move." Wrapped in camo fiber and thermal blankets, Thalza was hidden in the rear compartment. Nathan had already overridden the launch protocols and disabled the surveillance pings. He drove fast and low, skimming over the dark dunes of Borealis Prime with only the twin moons to light the way. Behind them, alarms flared. The outpost knew something had happened, but by the time patrols realized what was stolen and who was missing, Nathan and Thalza were already gone. Their destination was an abandoned early war relay station, tucked away in a rocky gorge miles from any military route. Nathan had found it on a patrol weeks ago, forgotten, but with solar power still flickering through its grid. Inside, the place was cold, dusty, and creaking with neglect, but it was safe. He set her down on a rusted bunk and sealed the blast doors. "We'll stay here," he said, catching his breath. "At least for a while, until I figure something out." Thalza looked around the station. "You planned all this?" He shrugged. "I planned something, not all of it." She studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "You're different. Human?" he offered. "No, just different." Time passed in the forgotten outpost. Days bled into nights. The old station creaked in the wind, powered by flickering solar cells and Nathan's patchwork repairs. They rationed food and water, rewired consoles, created a short-range jammer in case Terran sensors came sniffing, and in that isolation, their bond grew stronger. Thal Zia shared stories from her youth, how she'd once dreamed of studying planetary ecosystems, how her species prized honor over kindness, and how being left to die was a ritual, not an act of cruelty. Nathan, in turn, spoke about Earth, his childhood in a small coastal town, the first time he saw the stars, the family he barely had time to write home to. Their conversations weren't always easy. Cultural gaps still existed. Language was clumsy. But between laughter and long silences, they forged something rare in wartime, understanding. Then one night, as a dry lightning storm echoed across the gorge outside, Thalza asked a question. "If our positions were reversed, if you had been the one dying in that crater, would I have saved you?" Nathan looked at her. "Would you have?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do now." In the heart of war, where rules were written in blood and loyalty demanded blind obedience, something had changed. A. Zirin, who once would have stepped over a dying enemy, now shared firelight with one, and a human soldier who had defied orders didn't regret a thing, because he hadn't rescued an alien anymore. The old relay station nestled in the rocky canyon became more than a hideout. It became a quiet sanctuary amid a galaxy torn apart by war. For Nathan Reed, it was a place where duty no longer meant following orders blindly. For Thalza, it was a place where survival wasn't about strength or honor, but compassion. Their days in hiding became a rhythm, repairing systems, sharing stories, rationing supplies, and slowly relearning what it meant to trust someone from the other side. But the sanctuary couldn't last forever. Solar panels were failing. Their food stocks were running low. Nathan had managed to keep the skimmer hidden, but its energy cells were drained, and scavenging runs had grown riskier each time. Patrol drones swept wider, and Terran communications chatter hinted that they were narrowing in. Still, Nathan refused to consider abandoning Thalza. She was no longer a rescued alien in his eyes. She was someone he respected, someone who had once been left to die but now stood on her own feet, wounded. Yes, but strong in ways that inspired him. And she had changed too. There was a moment, small but profound, that marked the shift. They had been repairing an old environmental sensor in the outpost when a small explosion from a short circuit flared up near Nathan's arm. Instinctively, Thalsa lunged forward and threw her wing over him, shielding him from the burst of heat. The damage was minor, but it told Nathan everything. She hadn't hesitated. The same Ziron who once admitted she wouldn't have saved a human had now risked herself to protect one. That night, as they sat beside a camp stove flickering against the metal walls, Thalsa finally said it. "I used to believe mercy was weakness." Nathan looked at her, expression unreadable. "But now," she continued, "I think it's the only reason I'm still alive. And maybe the only thing that could end this war." Nathan nodded slowly. "You're not the only one who's realizing that." They were no longer hiding from the galaxy. They had become a testament to it, proof that the war didn't have to define them. That there was another way. Then came the day the skies above the canyon darkened with the shadow of a Terran scout ship. At first, Nathan thought they'd been discovered. He rushed to shut down the outpost's limited power grid. But instead of gunfire, he heard the hum of a non-hostile landing. A team of neutral scouts, independent contractors allied with Terran command, stepped out, weapons holstered but cautious, and they saw it. A human and an alien sitting side by side. Not fighting, not interrogating, not betraying. Just existing. Together. Nathan stood to face them. "She's not your prisoner," he said firmly, "and I'm not a traitor. What we've done here, what we've learned, matters." The lead scout, a middle-aged woman with a skeptical expression, lowered her visor. "You brought her back? You saved her?" "She saved me too," Nathan replied. There was a long silence. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "You'll come. With us, both of you. No chains, no guns." As the shuttle lifted off, Thalsa sat beside him, staring out at the stars with wonder. For the first time in weeks, she didn't look afraid. "What happens now?" she asked. "We tell them what happened," Nathan said. "We tell them everything. Maybe someone listens." And someone did. The report from the scout team reached high command. And for once, bureaucracy paused to examine something deeper. Two enemies had chosen compassion over conflict. A Terran soldier had risked everything, not for power, not for leverage, but for life. Soon, Thalza's name was no longer listed as a hostile. She was marked instead as non-combatant, protected under Terran humanitarian code. Nathan received no medal, no ceremony, but he did get something better. A chance to speak before the military tribunal. where he told their story without shame. Some scoffed. Others listened. And somewhere, far above the battlefield, a seed of change was planted. Nathan and Thalza were later transferred to a diplomatic post, where their presence side by side became a symbol that maybe the war didn't have to end in annihilation. That maybe, just maybe, humanity's refusal to walk away was exactly what the galaxy needed. And for Thalza, the girl once left to die, her story didn't end in a crater. It began there.